Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Recognizing and Managing Stress. I'm Sarah Beth Ayers. I'm the Business Incubation Program Coordinator here at Innovate Springfield. And while I'm going over some housekeeping tips, if you could just chat into the chat box your name and what brings you to the session today, I'll kind of just keep chatting so we can get to know each other a little bit. And also maybe include your organization so we can just know where you're coming from too. So after this session, I will be sending out an electronic evaluation. Your feedback is extremely important to us. If you could please take the time to complete that eval, that would be great. I'm going to drop a couple of links into the chat as well for our I Spy hacks. We've got Pam on deck to provide a virtual pop-ups I Spy hack that's going to be really great. So stay tuned for that. And then just for all the other calendar of events stuff that we're curating right now. So let me get to it. I'm really excited today to introduce our speaker, Pam. She is an extension specialist in community and economic development with the University of Illinois. Pam is a superstar, you guys. She has an extensive background in banking and economic development, and for the last 2 years, she's been working with the University of Michigan and teaching farm stress to farm service agency employees. So self-care is a topic that is particularly dear to Pam, and she's put great effort into curating evidence-based resources and tips to help you all better recognize and manage stress today. So I'm just going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Pam. And thank you all for chatting in your name and organization and what brings you to our session today.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. I really appreciate this. One of the things I want to say, and please hear me out, the other day I had offered that people could go ahead and open their videos, and then when we have discussions, either put it in the chat or put it in, to actually open their mics. I just want to let you say that that's optional. You do not have to open your videos. The moderator on my last program told me that when I said, go ahead and open your videos and your microphones, 2 people left and didn't come back. So I don't know if their hair wasn't done or they didn't feel comfortable. The house was a little messy. So please feel free. If you want to open your video right now, it makes it a little bit more interactive and engaging when we're on Zoom. We are recording this video though. So if that bothers you, that's fine. And again, when we come up and I start to interact and we're talking about things, you can put it in the chat or you can open your mics, okay? And welcome to everyone that's here. So without further ado, let's get going here. According to an article in the Washington Post yesterday, 53% of Americans said that the stress from the pandemic has harmed their mental health. All stressors, financial or social, have the potential of increasing levels of depression and suicide. Stress can affect anyone at any time. According to the research, at least 1 in every 5 people is currently experiencing mental health issues. But if the Washington Post survey is correct, right now it looks more like 1 out of every 2 people in the United States feel that the pandemic is putting stress and pressure on them. According to Dr. Courtney Cuthbertson from the University of Illinois, you do not have to be a mental health professional to be able to recognize stress or develop an action plan for dealing with stress and its causes in your daily life. Dealing with stress is different for everyone. It can be even more difficult if you've experienced a trauma in your past. Understanding how stress affects us and knowing how to recognize signs of depression and the potential for suicide are important skills to have as we work through these troubled times. I'm going to mention here that I am not a mental health professional. I was asked to teach farm stress to farm service agency employees, over 500 of them, along with a team from Michigan State University, because I was actually an agricultural lending officer in 1987 during the farm crisis. Right now, bankruptcies for farmers have increased to 580 this year. back in the late 1980s, I think it was actually 1986 or 1987, there were 5,800 farm bankruptcies. So I was very familiar with the stress. We did have customers at the bank who actually took their own lives and died by suicide. And so when this came up, I thought it was really important. But then when I had a little time, you know, when the pandemic started in March, I realized that stress was a lot more than just farmers. Yes, the farmers are still impacted, but so now are essential workers and others, you know, all of us in one way or another have been impacted. So the next step is, what does stress look like for you? Okay, and LaShawna, I'm going to keep watching the chat box, but two people can have the same stressor and each will be effective differently. Someone may not feel as much stress as another who's experiencing the same stressor. Stressors are subjectively different for each individual. So now for a minute, what I'd like you to do is I want you to think about how stress impacts you. How do you feel? Does it affect you physically, cognitively? Is it something where you feel depressed? Tell me how stress, either in the chat box or if you'd like to open your mic, I'd love to hear what you're thinking right now.
I'll jump in and just share that when I'm feeling stressed, my mind races. I can feel like my heart start to pound, or that like trembling, shaky sort of, I can't really focus feeling.
Yeah, I have a similar experience. Like I've thought about it as when you start getting super overstimulated and stressed, where it's almost like you just kind of, I've experienced just kind of like just horizon where everything just kind of blends together and I have trouble differentiating and, you know, like finding a place to begin to get out of it. I eventually do, but it seems like it's just like everything explodes on the screen for, you know, a short time, and then you really have to kind of paddle out of it.
Anyone else?
I agree. I have situations that are similar to both of those, but sometimes it depends on like what is causing my stress. So for instance, yesterday I was feeling really overwhelmed by my to-do list. And what happened was the whole shoulder, neck tension just like felt like a weight on me and all my muscles were so tight. But usually it's more the other things. So it just depends on what is the root of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Rhonda's put out here, the more stress I am under, the more I can't focus on any one thing. Without being able to focus, I don't get anything done, which makes me feel worse. Very good. Anybody else want to share how stress affects them? Here we go. LaShawna also says physical weight gain. Yes, actually, the stress can lead to using a coping mechanism that may not be as healthy as it should be. And I think many of us during this pandemic have turned to food and possibly alcohol in order to reduce our stress levels. But we're going to talk about some better coping mechanisms in a minute. Stress can lead to many health issues, including, and this is a list of the health issues, high blood pressure, headaches, heart attacks, strokes, weight gain, digestive troubles, skin rashes, irritable bowel syndrome, cramps, bloating, diarrhea, and constipation. A whole list of health issues. But there is a difference. First of all, not all stress is bad. Some stress is what we need in order to get ourselves motivated or move through, or in some cases, stress can help us to initially focus on a project because it's something we need to get done, or if it's in an emergency having to deal with that, you know, stress. It's when we have chronic stress, when that stressor continues over time, where it can become a problem and turn into depression and potentially thoughts of suicide. So how do we cope with stress? Coping strategies are the specific techniques or activities we use to cope with stress. Based on the research, optimistic people actually have an easier time dealing with stress and accepting loss, especially if the situation is uncontrollable. I was really interested in that optimistic people versus the pessimistic people. It was a very interesting article. There's also such a thing as emotional transmission of stress to the family. And I like to mention it here because I think with all of this self-isolation, families are all hunkered down. We have to understand an emotional spillover of stress from work to home and from parents to children is very real. So let's talk about how we cope with stress. First of all, the first thing we generally turn to is problem-focused coping. And many of you might think about this back in March when we first went into the lockdown, and many of you needed to work remotely from home. Our first option is we have the goal of removing or circumventing that source of stress. So what we try to do is a solution to the problem. The only problem with that is that if the situation can't be controlled, problem-focused coping strategies could generate frustration and anger, which we have seen a lot of this manifest throughout the country. A lot of it is that many people in March thought that this was going to be temporary, and unfortunately it didn't turn out to be. And for the farmers themselves, it's very similar, is that year after year after year, they have this financial stress going on. They think things are finally getting back to normal, and the next thing you know, you've got tariffs placed on you. The same thing with us. We were in lockdown, you know, the number of cases started to drop, and then now we're going, we had the possibility of actually going into another lockdown. If people cannot find a way to solve the problem and remove the stress, they may give up any efforts to resolve it. And this is where it can turn into depression and the possibilities of suicide. Emotional focused coping mechanisms are the other side, and that's an attempt to reduce or eliminate, same thing, the emotional distress that's associated with the stressful situation. As I mentioned before, there's a difference between optimists and pessimists. But emotional focused coping mechanisms can either facilitate or impede your problem-focused coping. Meaning, and that's what we were talking about a minute ago, is some of the things that we're doing to ourselves, for instance, overeating in order to appease our stress, that this can actually have a detrimental effect and lead to even further health problems. So let's talk a minute about healthy emotional focused coping mechanisms. And one of the reasons why many of you may already have adopted some of these mechanisms, and that's great. But they're very important, and they're very, very important to teach our children. That's one thing I want to keep in mind, is that unfortunately we didn't grow up with very good coping mechanisms, many of us here in the United States. Some of us may have learned them along the way, but these are really important. You'll notice number one here is not an emotion-focused coping mechanism, okay? It's just a note to everyone before I go through these. Nothing in this program is a replacement for contacting a mental health provider when needed. One of my colleagues watched me give this program, and she said, you know, Pam, I'm afraid that it's going to sound like that, okay, if you're stressed, you're depressed, all you have to do is these healthy emotion-focused coping mechanisms and you're okay. And that's not true. It's good to have these available and even do some of these coping mechanisms on a daily basis, you know, to have it set up to where you're going to take that 10-minute walk in the morning, or if you do feel stressed, to try to get away and do a little bit of meditation or some breathing exercises, which we're going to go through on the next page. But it does not replace the need for a mental health provider, especially if you know that there's a high level of stress, you're feeling very depressed and lonely, there's self-isolation and some of the others. So keep that in mind as I go through these other coping mechanisms. There's also, probably the number one is social support. And unfortunately, a lot of people right now don't have the social support. That's why I have your videos on, is because it's really great to be able to see you and interact with each other just a little bit, even if you're on a Zoom meeting. If you can talk to someone else, if you can interact with those people, you can feel a lot better just by them being there. Relaxation techniques, I'm going to mention some here. I actually have been doing meditation since the 1990s, and I have found it very helpful. And I also do breathing exercises. But relaxation techniques can include meditation, and there's several meditation apps. Some are free, like Calm and Headspace, Aura, Yoga Glow, and Inscape. You can have hobbies. Use breathing exercises. You could do exercise, yoga, walking in nature, or they're even doing tree hugging in Ireland, or in Iceland, since you can't hug someone else. So they're actually teaching people how to go out in nature, find a huge tree, just wrap your arms around it, and just feel the energy coming off that tree. Maybe it's the warmth from the sun in the bark. But anyway, while we're here, you can open your mics again, or you can put it in the chat box. Do any of you have healthy emotional focus coping mechanisms that you're currently using through this stressful time? Anyone want to give me a suggestion of what they might be using? Anybody have any daily routines? Because if you don't, then this is a great program to take today.
One of the daily intentions that I set for myself for self-care when the pandemic started, not knowing what my access to healthcare would look like, was to floss every day. I have kind of a dental anxiety, and I found that flossing makes my time in the chair less. But it's been one of those sort of routines that I can stick to. And I set the intention a long time ago and set a reminder in my phone. And now every time I get the reminder, I'm like, oh, I've already done that. Like now it's just one of those sort of habits that I've gotten into. But I think too, along with like boundaries and saying no, is just really articulating my needs and to my family. So for instance, today is fee day for my kids at school, and I had all these forms and all of this stuff to do, but I had this program and all the time slots were full. So I had to ask my husband to take the lead on fee day, having done kind of all of the back work, and forgive myself for not having been able to go, right? Like it still just sort of articulating to him though, like, I need you to do this today because I can't. So that's
okay.
what I'm doing.
All right. Anyone else? Galaxy, do you have any ways that you, anything you use when you're super stressed out to bring your stress level down, your heart rate down, anything you use?
Usually load up the boat and head to the lake.
There you go. Perfect. You know, there's a lot of research on how important going into nature when you feel stressed. Actually, that is highly recommended. Good for you. Here we got Trish. When I really need to take the stress down a notch, I meditate, used counted breathing, 3 in, 4 out, for example. Also ride my bike, garden, cooking, excellent, excellent. More intentional self-care. I've started walking and exercising more. I've also increased my reading and journaling. Journaling can be very important. You have the stressors to let that out. Yes, getting out in nature. And Galaxy, that was an excellent, excellent suggestion. There's also things like learning to say no, making sure you're expressing your feelings. And then ultimately what we're trying to do is be able to accept the situation and move on. I mean, I have a supervisor who talks a lot about us going back to normal. And of course, now what we thought might take a couple of months looks like it could take significantly longer than that. So going back to normal may not be the best goals. It may be just accepting where we are and that this is our new reality and that we need to learn to live and enjoy and be happy in our lives the way they are right now. Unfortunately, like I said, we're going to talk in a minute what happens when we use the not so healthy emotion-focused coping mechanisms in excess. Okay, I just wanted to check those. Excuse me, just 1 second. I have allergies and they are starting, so here we go. Well, the next thing I want to do, and I use this one, I hope you find it interesting. We're not going to watch the video. I am just going to go through this breathing exercise with you. I'm going to quickly read it, and then we're going to try it. Everybody can try it. If you want to turn off your video while you're trying it, that's okay. You won't bother me. On or off, whatever you feel better with. But what this is that there is actually a Navy SEAL breathing technique called box breathing, which is taught to the Navy SEAL, which they are always in some sort of a stressful situation. I think you've seen movies and of them being dropped into the ocean on rescue missions. And so this is a technique that they came up with. So what I want everybody to do, you could close your eyes, keep your eyes open, but I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to try it. We're going to first breathe in for a slow count of 5. Then we're going to hold our breaths for a slow count of 5. Then exhale for a slow count of 5. Then leave your lungs empty for a slow count of 5. And then we're going to repeat it once. And I just want you to try it to see where you are when you begin, how you feel, and how you feel when you're done. And there's also studies that show how much this can actually reduce your blood pressure and other stressors. Okay, so let's try this. First, breathe in for a slow count of 5. 3, 4, 5. Now hold your breath for a slow count of 5. 3, 4, 5. Now exhale for a slow count of 5. 3, 4, 5. Now leave your lungs empty for a slow count of 5. 3, 4, 5. Now let's repeat that. Breathe back in for a slow count of 5. 3, 4, 5. Now hold your breath for that slow count of 5. 3, 4, 5. Now exhale for a slow count of 5. 3, 4, 5. Now leave your lungs empty. 3, 4, 5. Now you can breathe normally, and let me know. How did you feel? Do you feel more relaxed? And put your videos back on if you want to. We're being very informal today. We're very lucky to have this small group. And you can open your mics, or let's see. Oh, Sarah says she does box breathing before presentations. Laugh out loud. LaShonda does feel more relaxed. Anyone else?
Well, I just yawned.
You just yawned?
That seems to have
Well, that
relaxed.
was the whole trick. I'm going to put you to sleep. You're going to feel real good about the program.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? And like I said, feel free, if you want to, you can turn on your videos and your mics. Okay. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I will talk to you just a little bit about the fact that as Americans, many of us have not developed the positive emotional focus coping mechanisms when we were children. So we need to be careful when we attempt to reduce or eliminate an emotional stressor. Here are some of the examples of types of coping mechanisms. And now, I'm not against drinking. What we're talking about is many of these in excess, or if we continue to do them. Let's say, for instance, that you're someone who may have had an occasional drink before the pandemic started. But since March, you've been drinking every evening. As soon as you get off work, you're having 2 or 3 drinks. that could potentially point to a problem. You know, it might be a good time for you to check in with a mental health care professional, see if you can reduce that or replace that drinking with some other, you know, breathing exercises, relaxation exercises. It's a self-check and it's self-care. Those types of coping mechanisms that can become excessive and actually make matters much worse are denial and distancing. There was a lot of denial in the beginning. Fantasizing, self-blame, self-isolation. Now, self-isolation has actually been proven to lead to suicide. And of course, now we have an entire nation, we have almost the whole world. Many of us are still in self-isolation since March. So this could actually become a problem, even if it's what we're being required to do. I have talked in other classes about people who are in a position. Check in on those seniors. Make sure those people in your life that are 60 and over who have been self-isolating are okay. You know, just a phone call. Excessive drug use, increased consumption of alcohol, overeating, as LaShonda was sharing with us, and aggressive behavior. Aggressive behavior is actually an outletting of that stressor. And we didn't talk about it when we were talking about how we felt and when we had that stressors, but you know, when we're under stress, we have a tendency to become angry, and some people to become more violent. Families have been cooped up together because of our stay-at-home orders and are chafing under the stress. We noticed that there has been a huge increase in interpartner violence and also child abuse. And I was just reading an article the other day that indicated that many of the social workers who would be doing care checks on these young people that have already been determined to be in high-risk situations for abuse, because of the pandemic, they are not being checked on. So this is something that we need to, and we're going to talk about how involved you might want to get in all of this, but this is something that we need to keep in mind as communities, being involved in communities and working with other people in the communities. As Dr. Folkman said, non-constructive coping mechanisms can lead to drug abuse, domestic violence, obesity, alcoholism, and suicide, especially in rural communities prior to the pandemic. They called them deaths of despair. You know, the manufacturing firms had closed, they didn't have the jobs that they had, and suicides have been increasing. In fact, I'm trying to think, I don't have it right in front of me, but suicides between 2000 and now have increased a significant amount in the United States. I might find that, that percentage when I get further. Okay, now we're going to watch a video for a minute because Brene Brown does a better job on describing empathy, the difference between sympathy and empathy, than I could ever do. And she does it in about 2.5 minutes. But before we watch this video, I want you to think about a couple of things. First of all, whenever you're going to be dealing with someone who is under chronic stress, maybe showing signs of depression, you have to ask yourself a few questions because you have to be somewhat prepared and willing to do this empathy. You want to consider your own mindset and the sort of mental posture you are bringing to the conversation. I want you to ask yourself these questions. Do you feel like you can offer empathy to someone? Can you think of things from your perspective? If you don't feel that you're in a position to do this, you may, and I will give you some resources at the end of the program, you may want to move them forward, maybe get them to a mental health provider if you don't feel that you are in a position to handle it. Because sometimes if we're under stress, if we're going to be short with this person, or we're not going to have the time to do active listening and show empathy, we can actually make matters worse rather than better. Again, though, we're sort of the community patrol. This is like learning CPR just in case. So keep that in mind, though, that not everyone has the time or is in a situation where they feel or have the mindset to actually help someone who is in trouble. And I'm not trying to judge here. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and bring this video up real quick. Let's go ahead and share the video. Where did she go? Where did it go? Oh, okay. Sorry. Oh, hold on a second. I forgot to share my there we go. Share computer sound. I've got it now. Thank you.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, are we all back? And I see we now have 10 participants. Welcome, everyone. I see some more people came on the call. I'm glad you're here. She does such a good job talking about the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy, you know, especially with that at least, you know, it's trying to put that not wanting to take on the responsibility of becoming vulnerable and just listening and understanding where this person is coming from. And a lot of times we find out that just people being able to express their feelings and talking about things, it's what they talk about when people working with those on suicide hotlines, they talk about talking them down. It's not really a talking them down, it's a listing them down. It's allowing them to talk and express their feelings and work out their feelings. So what it is you have to get rid of that it's about me or even a little bit about me, it's about them. The other thing too is that this is a definition, empathy and compassion. Compassion is not the same thing as empathy or altruism. Excuse me. Though the concepts are related, while empathy refers more generally to our ability to take the perspective of and feel the emotions of another person, compassion is when those feelings and thoughts include the desire to help. Now, keep in mind, there is no judgment here. Some of us, just like I could never be a nurse, I can't deal with blood. Some of us just are not prepared mentally, emotionally to be able to deal with some things like this. So I will talk about some things you can do though, if you don't feel like you are in a position. Let's take a look at what happened in the chat box here. The feeling with peace of that definition is a great takeaway. Thank you very much, Trish. That was excellent. There's also such a thing as compassion fatigue, which I think a lot of our mental health care providers are feeling right now. Also our healthcare providers is what I meant. That compassion fatigue is that they're out there putting out so much compassion that they basically use it up, and then they don't have anything else to give. Self-care for a caregiver is critical. Okay, now, one of the important things to do when you're dealing with someone who is having issues and you want to use that empathy is we call it active listening. I don't know if any of you have ever, yes, Sarah, that's great. Just holding space and not trying to fix anything. Yes, that's a great way to put it. But active listening, and that's what part of that is not trying to fix it. Active listening requires being present while encouraging the person to share more. There isn't enough time for me to cover everything about active listening in this program. I mean, you could take a whole hour course on active listening. And you know, if you were a parent or a manager or a supervisor, or you deal with a lot of people, I recommend you at least find a short video on active listening after this presentation, or even an hour-long one, to learn more about how to do it. I am honestly not that good at it. I'm still practicing myself, but it's really critical. Seriously, I'm not. I'm extroverted. I see Sarah laughing. I love it when your videos are on because then I can interact with you so well. But active listening is very important. When you're doing active listening, it's more than hearing with your ears. In fact, that's why I have this photo in this slide, and I'm hoping you can see it. I'm going to move the videos for a minute. You notice that this woman, there's eye contact. She is looking directly at her. She's reading her facial expressions. She's listening to the tone of her voice, the speed, the volume, the inflection when they're speaking. The timing of the speaking. She looks at the body posture, movement, and use of gestures. And then how close she's sitting. It's like the woman that she's listening to has got to feel like she's all encompassed, that she's the most important thing in that woman's world right now. She's not looking away. She's not ignoring what she's saying. She's not actively, and she's not putting forth anything. She's just listening. Now, there are, this is just a list of 2, 4, 6, 7 active listening skills. It comes from a presentation. I'm going to go through them real quick because we are going to get out of here on time today, and I still have some more material to talk about. So active listening skills: being present, being right there, being aware of the body language, focusing on what the other person is saying. You want to ask open-ended questions. That in of itself is another class, but the open-ended questions are the how, why, when, where. You want them to be able to expand what they're saying, not just give you a simple yes or no answer. You want to summarize the situation. You want to reflect on what that person is saying about their feelings. You want to really think about it, but let them do most of the talking. You can clarify to make sure you understand, you know, to sort of say back to them in a shortened version of what you've heard. That can be really important to the other person too, because one, they can tell you, no, that's not what they were saying, and be able to express their feelings again, or they know that, yes, you do understand. And for the person that's feeling the depression at that particular point, or maybe anxiety or stress, that's going to make them feel a lot better. And then it gives you an opportunity to give words of encouragement. And of course, you can react if it's something that you think is, oh, that sounds like it's really stressful. It can be very, very difficult, and very difficult for us as well. If you feel vulnerable when you're showing empathy and doing the active listening, that is perfectly normal. It is not comfortable, as she mentioned, you know, for the little bear with the fox. It was tough for the bear to put themselves in that situation, especially if maybe you've gone through a similar trauma. And that's where we have to really watch ourselves. When I say I'm bad at this, I'm, you know, sort of telling on myself, is that they're talking about their experience and their feelings. If we've gone through the same trauma, we may feel that it's important for them to hear about what we went through. You know, like, oh, I went through that too. My husband left me too. Blah, 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 blah. The thing is no, that's not the right time. This is the time to listen. You know, they don't want to really know about you. It's more about them. And that's where you want to keep the focus, is on them. I'm going to check this chat box real quick. Okay, we're good. So like I said, this was a very quick overview of active listening skills. I really encourage you to learn more, like I said, especially if you're a manager or a supervisor, for the people that you work with, and also if you're a parent and working with your children. So what do suicide warnings sound like? Okay, here is a list, and actually it's a real list from a suicide hotline and from other people that talk about when they hear these things coming in. Things like, it's not worth it anymore. I don't think I can keep going. What happens to my debt if I die? If you foreclose on me, you'll see my obituary in the paper. Is this enough medicine to kill someone? And take good care of your mother when I'm gone. These are the types of warnings that you might hear someone say. And now what we're going to start talking about is what we can do. I'm also going to talk a little bit about teens. I don't know if any of you have teenage children, teenage nieces and nephews. But this was something that really bothered me, and so I've interjected it into the program at this point so you're aware. Suicide is the third leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, after accidents and homicides. So accidents, car accidents, number one reason for death on teenagers. Homicide is second, suicide is third. To me, that is disturbing. It's also thought that at least 25 attempts are made for every completed teen suicide. Suicide among teens often happens after a stressful life event, such as a problem with school, a breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend, the death of a loved one, a divorce, or a major family conflict. Understanding depression in teens is very important since it can look different from commonly held beliefs about depression. For example, it may take the form of problems with friends, grades, sleep, or even being cranky and irritable rather than chronic sadness or crying. Keep a close eye on a teen who is depressed and withdrawn. If you learn that your child is thinking about suicide, get help immediately. Okay. Does stress always lead to thoughts of suicide? No. Everyone faces stress at some point in their life. And as I mentioned before, some stress is actually good. For some of us, though, prolonged chronic stress may lead to depression and difficulty coping. I don't know how many of you have experienced depression. I'm sure many of you have. And as I said, the Washington Post survey indicated that 1 out of every 2 people has felt some kind of depression. And in fact, the former First Lady, Michelle Obama, said that she is occasionally faced with depression because of this pandemic and the impact that's going on and all of the violence and the protesting. But no, it doesn't always lead to suicide, not always. But depression is where someone feels that they are in such a deep, dark hole. They don't see any way out. They don't see a future for themselves. It can be temporary, but it can also, if it becomes prolonged, it can potentially lead to thoughts or what they call suicide ideation, basically thoughts of dying by suicide. And you notice I'm not using the word committed here. In mental health circles, we are no longer, and even I've noticed that many of the journalists are no longer saying committed suicide. Committed suicide is like committing a sin or committing a crime. Right now, it is not a crime to take your own life in the state of Illinois. It is a crime to assist someone in taking their life, but it's not a crime to take or attempt to take your life in the state of Illinois. So it's not a crime. So basically, these people aren't dying by cancer. They're dying by suicide. So that's the term in case you're interested in what's politically correct. But suicide does not discriminate. People of all genders, ages, ethnicity can be at risk. It is important to note that even among people who have risk factors for suicide, most do not attempt suicide. It remains difficult to predict who will act on suicidal thoughts. So now, what should I do? What is the next step? Now, this step, I know for some people can seem like, oh no, I could never do that. And I'm going to let you know that since I have started teaching, which was 2 years ago, Farm Stress, and now the Recognizing and Managing Stress, which is both about everyone's stress, really. I've actually had to ask this question 3 times, and once I got a yes answer. And I'll tell you, it really was a scary thing for me. We are all laymen, okay? But it is really important that community members across the nation better understand these concepts, because there's so many things that we can do to help prevent suicide. And if we do them, and it just whatever we can do, we do them, we can hopefully offset some of this. We do not know whether suicides are going up or down right now. We have seen examples of healthcare providers dying by suicide, farmers dying by suicide. Unfortunately, the CDC, their numbers are about 2 or 3 years out. So it's going to be a while before we see what kind of impact it is. So what should you do? Ask directly if the person is thinking about suicide. You can argue with me on this point, but the research is saying that this does not increase risks of suicide. Research shows it may provide the person with a sense of relief. It also makes the person back up, think, and maybe have the time to be able to stop where they are, think through But what I'm going to do, and there's one more thing I want you to read, because this is on teens. And like I said, it doesn't flow very well with I interject here, it doesn't flow very well with the program, but I found these, I haven't figured out to make that flow better yet. According to the CDC, when dealing with teens, some parents are reluctant to ask teens if they have been thinking about suicide or hurting themselves. Some fear that by asking, they will plant the idea of suicide in their teen's head. It's always a good idea to ask, even though doing so can be difficult. Sometimes it helps to explain why you're asking. For instance, you might say, I've noticed that you've been talking a lot about wanting to be dead. Have you been having thoughts about trying to kill yourself? This is from Kids Health on teen suicide. And I really, if you have teenagers, it may be a good idea to just get some of this information, read up on it, just in case something like this happens. What I'm going to do now is, you don't have to turn on your mics, but what I want you to do is I want you to ask this question out loud twice. Because I found that once I started to practice saying this, that it felt more comfortable. These words are really hard to say. I mean, some of you, it may be easier, especially, and I forgot to ask this, if any of you are mental health professionals or work in the mental health field, would you please put that in the chat box? I'd love to know if anyone online or on the call today is actually a mental health professional. But go ahead, let's do it twice. Are you having thoughts of suicide, death, or dying? Are you having thoughts of suicide, death, or dying? Okay, it's uncomfortable, it's difficult to say, but it could mean the difference between someone living and dying. So, and especially if you're talking about family members, friends, people, colleagues at work, you may come into this situation and just try to remember that. Now, what's the next step? So what if that person says yes? Hold on just one more second. I apologize. I didn't realize I had these allergies today.
No apologies.
Thank you.
Also,
Okay, what if the person says yes? Well, I know that the first thing I did was panic. It was a farmer who had gone through 3 years of bad years, and then there were the floods. This was like it probably was a year ago last spring. So I don't think I handled it properly the first time, but let me tell you what you should do. And what I'm going to recommend here is, if you have your phone ready with your camera on it, I'm suggesting you take a photograph of this slide and the next one, and you put it somewhere on your phone. In fact, I recommend you create an album on your phone called Emergency, and you take photos of both of these slides, this one and the next one. You put it in your emergency album, and then when you have some time, it's probably a good place to take a photograph of your doctor's business cards, your children's doctors, anything for emergency, because when something actually happens, it's so much harder to know what to do. But if you can just click on that, and there it is on your phone, and all you have to do is read it off. So what if the person says yes? Number one, do not leave the person alone. Number two, be prepared with that list of resources on your phone. Then give them some options for a next step. Calling the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and the phone number is right here. You can text crisis. You can text the crisis text line, text GO to that number. You can also, I did not realize this till I took this class, you can call 911 for a welfare check. Let's say this person is on the phone with you, they're not living in the same town, or they're all the way across town. You are very concerned about them and their life. You can call the police and ask for a welfare check. Let them know that you think it could be a potential for a suicide. Could they go by and do a welfare check? You could take them to a local hospital or a mental health provider. if you know where the mental health provider is. If not, you can take them to the emergency room. Call a family member or a friend to be present with that person. That is also an option. And I see a hand raised.
Hi, I just wanted, oh, I'm sorry. You can finish what you're saying. I just had something to add.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, right there.
I just wanted to add that I have had to call the police on a suicidal family member twice, and they were on it.
Good, good to know.
Still with us today because of how quickly they were on it. And one time it was like across country because the relative had called me in distress and told me where he was. And then I was able to call the police, and they were able to locate him based on the vague description that my relative gave. So it really does. It is call the police.
Yes, yes, call the police. And you were not there with them, so that is your option. That's an excellent suggestion. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And then at the end, which option does the person want? None of them is not an option, and that's what you want to know. One of the farmers that I worked with when it was the National Farmers Conference, and this was in Savannah last March, he indicated that he had a friend who he was with and realized that he was feeling suicidal. He literally took his phone and typed in the number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, handed him the phone, and sat there. He said, I'll either, move away so I can't hear while you're talking, or I'll stay right here, but you're talking, and he did not leave him alone. So these are things to remember, and especially in the situation if we're talking about teens as well as adults. Okay, the next slide. This is crisis resources. There's several. This is the other one I suggest you take a photo of and make sure that you have it on your phone. In fact, I just put one of these into a Facebook message yesterday. Now, I didn't know the person very well, and I probably didn't follow everything on the previous page, but the person seemed to be quite depressed. And so I gave them the call for calm. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, that's at the top. In Illinois, the governor has just set up something called Call for Calm. It's a service that allows people to speak with a mental health professional anonymously. All you have to do is text TALK to 552020, and they will connect you to a mental health professional. There's also an Illinois helpline for opiates and other substances. There is a lot of research out there, a lot of people, especially psychologists, who are talking about the fact that many suicides are going undocumented because we do not know if it's an accidental overdose or if it was a deliberate overdose. But either way, if you've got someone that you know is addicted to opiates or heroin, heroin is an opiate, I apologize, opiates or alcoholism, you can always call that 833-2-FIND-HELP number. And then when we were talking about the domestic violence, because those social workers are not out checking on those children, I am a big proponent, and I know it can kind of make for some not necessarily great Thanksgivings or getting along with your neighbor across the fence. But if you think that someone, a man, a woman, or a child is in danger of being abused or is being abused, then I would suggest that you call that domestic violence hotline, or you call 911 for a check, or you can give the numbers to them. But I really do feel like a lot of people, especially those that can't get out or have drinking problems already, drug problems already, that the domestic violence definitely is increasing in this country. Finally, if you want to learn more about this, there's a lot of other resources out there. If you want to know more about self-care, the University of Illinois Extension, one of our divisions, has a wonderful Discover Wellness series. There are videos, handouts, and additional resources. And, I was going to let you know, Sarah, that is there a way I can send you this PowerPoint and you can send it out to all the registered people via email?
Absolutely. It would be my absolute
Okay.
do that. Thank you.
Let me do that. That way people don't have to worry about trying to copy down these URLs. There's also a Rural Resilience Farm Stress Training Program. It's a 3-hour program that's online. It was developed. This is actually the online portion of the program that I taught for the last couple of years. That is a wonderful program. It's developed by, well, I don't want to say a great team because I was on it, but a team led by MSU, Michigan State University. The Center for Disease Control has a wonderful, it's a technical package of policy programs and practices. Now, when you open it, you're going to see it's like 60 pages long, but it is not 60 pages long. It's like 45 pages of photos. So it really is a lot easier to read and understand, and it has other things that you can read and think about, including some of these quotes that I've brought out about the teens. And then finally, there's actually a mental health first aid course. This is the link. It's given across the state. It is an 8-hour program. But if there's anyone on the call that actually is dealing with, say, their own mental illness, or someone in the family that has a mental illness, this is a wonderful program to take to be better prepared to deal with that. We haven't really talked about mental illness. And of course, anyone with a mental illness, everything we've talked about is actually accelerated. I mean, it's sometimes, especially if they are dealing with stress, even when they're medicated. If they are unmedicated, it can make it even more difficult. And honestly, I do have a bit of mental illness myself. I have what they call seasonal mood disorder. And I have just bought myself another new sun therapy lamp. I have found that works very well. But I even got it one day this summer when we had a very gray, it rained all day, or it rained for a couple of days. And there is literally nothing other than that I can do for it. But it's so difficult for me because, and it gets worse as I get older, but I feel this just all-encompassing level of depression, and I just can't really get rid of it. So I know it can be very difficult having a mental illness or dealing with one. So that mental health first aid course might be something you want. Now, the very last one is, I really appreciated, Trish, you talking about this, but we've got a few minutes left. It's 11:06. We were going to get done at 11:15, right, Sarah? I'm right on time. So really, if there is something that you'd like to open your mics, or you can put it in the chat, or if you want to use that raise hand function under the participant list, feel free to do that. I should be able to see that. And let's just talk about this for a minute. You know, what are you doing, or what could you do to help your community address issues surrounding mental health? Or maybe you'd like to share a story at this particular time. I think stories are important. And anyone? I'll give you a few minutes.
I'll be glad to share.
Oh, please.
Amy?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi. So I'm actually a certified Holy Yoga and trauma-sensitive Holy Yoga instructor.
Yay.
And Holy Yoga is a Christ-centered certification. So it's very biblical based. So we do a lot of meditation and scripture, and we kind of weave the Word of God through our classes. So one of the things that I've done, I don't really know if it's super effective or not, but I have seasonal affective disorder, and I've had a couple of suicidal ideations. One of them probably about 3 years ago. So I'm 46. So I was 43 and I woke up in the middle of the night and had I'd had some recurring health problems that I thought I had dealt with, and they were returning, and I couldn't get it figured out at all. Nothing I was doing, no doctor visits seemed to get to the bottom of it. So I'd had this thought in the middle of the night that my family would be better off without me because I'm a pain in the butt to deal with all of my struggles. And I recognized immediately that that wasn't even really my thought. Like it was, because of my Christian beliefs, I recognized that it was just the enemy trying to, attack me. So I got up immediately and grabbed my Bible and my journal and kind of worked it out through the Word of God. And one of the things that occurred to me that night was that if you're a believer, Jesus was grieved to the point of death the night before he was crucified. So, I mean, even if you're not a believer, just the story of Jesus and his crucifixion, he knew what was coming, and he was so overwhelmed by it emotionally that he just wanted to die and not have to go through what he knew was his plan on earth. So I found that really rather encouraging, because if you've struggled with a suicidal thought, and especially if you're a teenager, I think to know that it's not a foreign concept, that even Jesus, who is a historical figure, if that's all you believe, dealt with this, I think is really powerful. So I've used that story and my own testimony in some of the yoga that I've done, just so that the idea that someone can have the thought is brought out into the light, and it doesn't make you a bad person, or it doesn't mean there's something like critically wrong with you, that this is something that you can overcome.
Yes.
So anyway,
and thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. Actually, you brought up something that really is critical, and it's probably one of that motivating factors behind what I'm doing, and that's the stigma that surrounds suicide, depression, mental illness, mental health care. In fact, the ones that are dying by suicide the most right now are middle-aged white men, which, because they've lost their jobs, or they just feel there isn't any future. So reducing that stigma, and like you say, making it people understand that this can happen to anyone. It's like, it's not about judgment, it's about where we are. And if you are having those ideas, those the suicide ideation, or like you said, thoughts of suicide, that it's really important to remember that. And when that stigma holds people back from getting the help they need, depression and suicide, but alcoholism, just being able to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, I have people that tell me, well, I can't go because if my truck is in front of the building that they're in, everybody knows I'm going to be there. Well, it's supposed to be an anonymous program. Well, it may be anonymous in New York City, but it's not anonymous in Mount Vernon, Illinois, with those smaller rural communities. So working on that stigma, and the fact that the more community members know about this and know about what to do, the more powerful we can become. I believe it takes a village. So that's my moral code. It takes a village to raise children. It takes a village to deal with mental health and suicide prevention. It's not all in the hands of mental health care providers, and especially in rural areas where there may not even have any mental health care providers. Thank you very much, Amy. Anyone else have something they would like to share and just discuss? Trish.
Oh, I was just going to add that in a similar vein, it's just objectifying those feelings, whether it's like depression or like, PMS. So it's like you start feeling like you're sinking and you're overwhelmed, and to be able to objectify them helps me, instead of like blaming myself, thinking there's something like fundamentally wrong with me. It's being able to,
No, it's not. It's part of being human. It's not, if we were physically ill, first thing we do, hopefully, is set up a doctor's appointment, if we had diabetes. So if we have bipolar disorder, is that any different than having the diabetes? But it's the stigma and it's the fear. Yeah, that to me, that is why we're doing this as laymen. We are all laymen in the mental health. Unless you have a degree in mental health. But I still think there's a lot of things that we can do. So anyone else want to share? Sarah?
That just reminds me of something that my doctor said to me once, because I was resistant to taking medicine. And she was like, you could have a tooth pulled without Novocaine, but why would you want to? right? Like, are you a martyr?
Right.
Like, do you really?
Yeah, right, right,
Why do
exactly,
you do that?
exactly.
But I also wanted to ask Pam, as we think about like warning signs in folks and being kind of blunt with them, getting there fast, right? If you see someone struggling with alcoholism or whatever it may be, like, do you think it's the right, like, we're kind of obligated to confront them and say, like, I care about you and I see that you're struggling, like,
Yeah.
how would you approach that?
Again, that depends upon, and that's why I said it's a choice, because there's some people that would choose not to. First of all, I actually am a codependent. I was diagnosed as a codependent in my 40s. That's the opposite of an alcoholic drug addict. My family is full of mental health, mental illness, alcoholism, drug addiction. I mean, death by suicide. So that's, and violence, lots of violence I grew up with. Don't live that way anymore. So what I do know is, first of all, no one else calls anyone a drug addict or an alcoholic. I think you're an alcoholic. That's not how you start out. You may say, I think you may have a drinking problem. You're probably not going to get a lot initially, at least, because we go from denial, the next step is anger, which is what we've seen in this country. So the expectations is, if you've had a close friendship with this person's been struggling, you see they're struggling, you're concerned they may have have a drinking problem, you might say, I think you may have a drinking problem. I'm not big on these TV interaction things, but don't be surprised if they come back very defensive and angry. But at least you put that thought in their minds. They might separate from you, but all that is that's a risk you're taking when you start to get in someone's life. But when you say that, I think you may have a drinking problem, it's like, you might want to follow that up. Have you ever thought about talking to a mental health professional? This is cause us, or we know everybody else is on stress, to be understanding. If the person wants to open up about it and talk about it, well then, like I said, you're buying in, you've made a choice. Where's the empathy? Where's the but I also know, having lived with people with mental illness and alcoholism and drug addiction, that a lot of times, if they are not ready, well, then you may become an easy target for them, because they want the sympathy, or, they want to borrow money, or so. That's a very fine line. I would suggest that if you have someone, you could probably mention that and recommend a mental health, but for you to try to do any of the therapy, or, trying to drive them to a class, that's going to be very, very difficult. Although I think the more they might hear about that from other people, the more likely they are to do something. But my second husband was an alcoholic when I married him. He was an alcoholic when I divorced him, and he was an alcoholic when he died. He never could. No, in fact, the alcohol was more important than me. It was more important than my stepdaughter, his daughter. He just never could walk away from it it didn't matter how many interventions. I think what's more powerful is when you find someone who is worried they're an alcoholic, or worried that they have, that to be able to pull out your things and say, well, call for calm, try to find a mental health professional. Do you want me to drive you to the hospital? You want me to look up where you can, it's more them coming to you than you actually pushing them into it. They really do need to work with a mental health care provider, though. We don't have the training to deal with any of that.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you. I think that's helpful. And I appreciate, this was all very informative, and I made this lovely graphic. And
I see that. You're going to have to take a snapshot and send it to me.
yeah, we're going to decorate our hallway with all of our amazing graphics. So
Good.
Thank you so much, Pam. Thank you all for attending. I'll be following up with the recording, the PowerPoint, and the electronic evaluation, and we really appreciate your candid feedback. Thank you so much. Does anyone have anything else they want to share before we close today?
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day. All right. Sarah, I'll be talking to you next Wednesday, if not before. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.